Is Iran heading towards an economic explosion? Trump delivers a sharp message to Tehran. I have no timeline. I'm in no rush. The United States warned Russia against an attack on NATO soil and demanded that Moscow reduce its support for Iran. Putin is in America's crosshairs. Today, we will bring you the ultimatum delivered by the head of the CIA to Russia and the demand to reduce assistance to the Ayatollah regime. And Trump reveals details about the condition of Mojtaba Khamenei. It is a serious injury, the president said. Iran is fantasizing the spreading lies in order to appear strong. Officers in the Revolutionary Guards, they claim that they have restored all the weapon systems that were damaged and even imported new ones. But Iran's status is clear. The economy is being hit, while the regime is still protecting the people themselves at the people's expense. So Qatar's prime minister will visit Tehran to examine a separate channel with Iran's Revolutionary Guards, while the White House makes it clear that there are no contacts and no talks with Iran currently happening. And maybe Qatar is acting because of the unprecedented damage it suffered in the war with Iran, which is about $24 billion worth of damage, and an Iranian fingerprint in Bab el-Mandab. The meaning behind the destruction of Saudi weapons warehouses at the port of Mokha in western Yemen by the Houthis. And why did the IDF have to destroy the airport in Idlib, Syria? I'm Yair Pinto, joined by Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Today is August 27th, so let's begin. As the Kremlin continues to stretch the rope, Washington sent the most powerful man in American intelligence straight into the heart of Vladimir Putin's capital. The secret visit, revealed overnight in the American press, exposes the depth of the American intelligence concern over the next nightmare scenario, a limited Russian attack on NATO soil alongside the Moscow-Tehran axis that threatens to ignite the entire region. CIA Director John Ratcliffe made a first official visit of its kind to Moscow on Tuesday. The central goal of the dramatic trip was to deliver a direct warning to Russia's senior leadership against any attempt to test NATO's resolve in the coming years. And in Washington, officials are pointing to the possibility that Moscow could attempt a limited strike, ranging from a destructive cyber attack to a limited ground incursion, most likely against one of the Baltic states. The change in the intelligence assessments comes from growing concerns in the Kremlin over the shrinking room for maneuver in Ukraine. This is alongside internal pressure inside Russia to show a significant military achievement. And alongside the security warning, it was revealed that Ratcliffe gave Moscow a clear demand: drastically reduce military and economic support for Iran. This warning comes as the American administration prepares to impose unprecedented sanctions on any country that helps Tehran. So, according to one source, the CIA director made clear to the Russians that they must immediately stop the transfer of weapons and defense technologies to the Ayatollah regime. He also warned them against overreaction by the United States if they are hit by the planned economic sanctions. The Kremlin confirmed that the meetings took place. And while Iran's economy is breaking apart under sanctions and inflation is racing, President Donald Trump is sending a clear and sharp message to Tehran. There is no intention to ease the pressure or rush its end. In an exclusive interview with Al Jazeera, the president made clear that the United States is in a position of strength and has no intention of backing down. When reporter Tanya Nauri asked how long he was willing to wait for Iran to return to the negotiating table, Trump left no room for doubt, and he said, "I have no timeline, none. I am not in a rush. I have no timeline at all. The message is unmistakable. Washington will not hesitate to continue the combined pressure, economic and military, for as long as needed. According to the Trump administration, the United States is in an exceptional position of strength and is winning very big. And I have to say, he is not wrong, not at all. And if Trump has already declared that the United States has won in the Strait of Hormuz, we can begin to see how it happens in practice. So how did the American military actually break through the Iranian blockade in the Strait of Hormuz? Any answers in the comments? No? Iran did not need to close the strait completely. It was enough to hit a few tankers, lay mines, and scare the shipping companies and the insurers until traffic stopped on its own. For that, the Revolutionary Guards used mobile radars, cameras, drones, missiles, and also fast boats designed to locate ships and turn every passage through Hormuz into a dangerous gamble. Instead of chasing every threat separately, the Americans went after the weak point of the entire system. They began blinding it. Again and again, radars, sensors, and observation posts were destroyed. The very tools that allowed the Iranians to know where the ships were are not available to them anymore. And at the same time, American vessels cleared mines, and the Fifth Fleet began moving convoys of tankers at night under heavy protection from the sea and from the air. The harder it became for the Iranians to find and hit ships, the more companies returned to sailing. And so, not in one strike, but through a systematic campaign of hundreds of small actions, the blockade that Iran presented as unbreakable simply began to fall apart. Right now, we are back to about 2/3 of the export volume that used to move through the Strait of Hormuz before the war. This is while the United States is filling part of the remaining gap from Venezuela. And exactly as the reality on the ground is changing, the Iranian military spokesman, who we already know spread lies, claimed today on Thursday, that all weapons and systems damaged in the war with Israel and the United States have been restored. So according to him, Iran has even imported new systems. He claimed that the new systems were supplied through the defense industry and the military, while some were imported from abroad, and added that the new equipment, it strengthens Iran's operational capabilities. So this is exactly the Iranian method. The economy is burning, the people are hungry, but the regime keeps broadcasting strength. While diplomatic sources report that Qatar and Pakistan are continuing to try to mediate in order to prevent a broader regional catastrophe, Trump is locking in his position and making it clear the combined pressure, economic and military, will continue at full force until Tehran submits to the new reality. Iran and Oman, they are working through the details, and Qatar's prime minister is arriving in Tehran to calm the tensions, according to what they say. So after the Revolutionary Guard spokesman claimed that an agreement had been reached over the Strait of Hormuz, an Iranian source said that Muscat and Tehran have still not finalized the details. Tehran's prime minister is expected to discuss freedom of navigation in the maritime route with his Iranian counterparts as oil prices fall from the third day in a row. Beyond Muscat, Qatar is also speaking with the Iranians. Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed El-Thani, arrived in Tehran today on Thursday and is expected to meet several senior officials to discuss ways to reduce the tensions between the United States and Iran. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry said overnight that the visit is taking place as part of the ongoing mediation efforts and consultations between Iran and Qatar, and is intended to expand the relations and strengthen the regional ties. The White House, on the other hand, makes clear that there are no direct contacts and no official talks with Iran. And maybe Qatar's prime minister is rushing to speak with the Iranians because Qatar has suffered a loss of about $24 billion in the past 6 months because of the war between the United States and Iran. According to data that was published by Reuters, Qatar's natural gas exports have fallen by 96%. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump addressed the growing rumors around the condition of Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, and said that in his assessment, he's still alive, but his condition is very serious. This is not only a statement about his medical condition, it's a psychological strike at the heart of the Iranian regime's mechanism of succession and fear. And from here, we move on to Lebanon. Reports in Lebanon, they speak of an Israeli strike on the Ali Taher ridge in the south of the country. And at the same time, the High Representative of the Gaza Peace Council, Nikolai Mladenov, told the United Nations Security Council that the roadmap, including putting all types of weapons in Gaza out of use, there are no gray areas and no category that remains outside the process. Progress will be based on performance, not on a timeline. Our approach during implementation will be to trust nothing and verify everything. And in Bab el-Mandab, it is being reported that the Houthi forces launched missiles in recent hours at the port of Mokha and areas south of El-Kuchakach, using ballistic missiles identified by military media as assets of Iran's Revolutionary Guards. The attack caused large-scale secondary explosions at ammunitions, storage facilities, and other places. So we will bring all the details to your attention. So, as you can see, there's a lot ahead of us. Let's dive into all the details that we have. I'm Yair Pinto, joined by Shoshani. We're boots on the ground. We bring you everything that you need to know about what's happening in Israel and about this war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. But before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share this content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. And most importantly, don't forget to find me, Yair Pinto, and Shoshani on our social media accounts to get your first-hand perspective on what it's like to live in Israel under this war. During the ongoing conflict, Magen David Adom has been at the forefront, providing critical emergency medical services under unprecedented conditions. On October 7, 2023, as hostilities escalated, Magen David Adom mobilized over 10,000 first responders who bravely administered life-saving care amidst the unbelievable circumstances. In response to these challenges, Magen David Adom, they launched the Magen Teams project, which is training thousands of community members, municipal workers, and also security personnel to deliver immediate medical assistance in their localities. So this initiative ensures rapid response, even when professional medical teams, they face delays due to the ongoing threats. However, sustaining and expanding such vital services, it requires continuous support. So your contributions, your donations, they enable Magen David Adom to equip their teams with the necessary tools and the resources to respond effectively to the emergencies across this country. Together, we can make a difference. Visit SaveLifeIsrael.com. Again, that's SaveLifeIsrael.com and support Magen David Adom, Save Lives in Israel. And now, let's turn to our senior Middle East correspondent, Shoshani. Mati, is Trump's exposure to Mojtaba Khamenei's condition not just a political statement, but an American attempt to strike at the heart of the Iranian regime's mechanism of succession and fear?
The campaign against Iran has long ago, months ago, taken a turn from just the warfare side of it, the kinetic, as we like to call it, elements of this war, to a much more strategic war over finances, over trade, and over global alliances. And there is a lot that happens behind the scenes that we never get to hear about. This here is the exception, where we get to see that something that we weren't supposed to know about that gets leaked. The head of the CIA meeting with his counterpart, with high uppers in Russia, exposing the coordination, the cooperation that takes place behind the United States and the Russian Federation. Now, This is not a sole case in this. You need to understand in these size of relationships, these size of countries, they're frenemies any given day of the week. They're friends on certain aspects, they cooperate on others, and they're full-on enemies on different aspects, and they have enough nuance in the relationship, enough complexity to contain all of those conflicting messages and agendas. Case in point, Iran cuts off the oil trade coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. The Russians have sanctions removed from their economy by the United States to allow them to start selling oil and deflate the rising price of oil. This happened all the way at the beginning of this conflict many months ago now. And we don't really hear about that. All we see is the economic outcome in which the price of oil doesn't spike in the way it was projected to or the way the Iranians were hoping to. This is another example of that. The United States plays multiple different roles and wears different hats as it relates to Iran and the Russians, as it relates to NATO and the Russians. I'll give you an example. NATO treaty is the North Atlantic Treaty organization against Russia, essentially. It was created during the Cold War to fight off, quote unquote, or to protect Europe from the Soviet bloc. And US plays a very duplicit or double role in this. On the one hand, they say, yes, we're opposing these agendas, we're fighting on behalf of the West. But at the same time, the United States looks at the European countries and says, why are we carrying your weight all the time? Why do we have to be in an adversarial position or stance against the Russians when you are the ones that have the problem, or you're the ones that are causing the conflict, the difficulty with these different countries? The map of interest is complex. The map of interest is full of drama. And this is a sneak peek into how complicated those relationships really are. Now let's zoom out for just a second because there's more to this story. On the one hand, I'm just going to talk about the US and Russia for a second. Here's the big stories that they're fighting about right now. There's a place of the United States in the world that relates to the Ukraine and that relates to Iran. How much military presence does the US carry? What is the role of the Russians in that relationship? And then by extension, the financial aspect of that conflict. Is Russia selling oil without sanctions because of the conflict that's taking place against Iran? Is Russia exporting gas into Europe during this coming winter, even though the war continues against Ukraine? That's really just one example of the big conflicts where the US and the Russians have to go head-to-head against each other or find a basis for cooperation. But it gets deeper than that. Even on the strategic global stage, when you ask yourself the question of who are the allies of Iran and who are the enemies by extension of the United States, the answer isn't as clear as it was just a few months ago. I would have told you, still today I would say a similar thing, that behind the scenes, the countries that are backing the Iranian regime opposed to the American bloc are Russia, China, and their friends, maybe India, maybe Pakistan, maybe several others. But what if I told you it was more complicated than that? What if I told you that for those countries, their agenda trumps that, pun intended, trumps that of the Iranian agenda? As in, if Russia can do better diplomatically and financially by, well, just by abandoning the Iranian interest, they might go for that. If the Chinese can better themselves in the trade war against the United States, in the very substantial, very, thick tension that has to do with the South China Sea and a possible conflict in Taiwan, well, maybe China abandons the Iranian interest and goes with the United States. And we saw the early stages of exactly that. We saw China intentionally ease the financial or the global demand for oil by tapping into their reserves when they could have very easily put a choke on that and see the price of oil skyrocket. And they did the exact opposite, something that plays politically into the hands of President Trump. And they did so without claiming public credit for this move. But I can assure you that the Russians and the Chinese, by extension, know how to collect the debt of working hand in hand with the American government. And that's exactly what we're watching here. There's multiple conflicts taking place in the world, multiple elements and types of tension. And in all of that, the head of the CIA, the Secretary of State, the different foreign ministers have to maneuver this incredibly complex soup of interest and relationships, which sometimes looks like the United States working together with the Russians while still being completely at odds when it comes to what's happening in Ukraine. Although even on that topic, I'd say the relationship is slightly more complex than the media and the narrative that we're being presented with will allow for. And that really is how complicated inner relationships actually are in diplomacy, especially in these tenuous times. And in the end, remember, when you think about Machiavelli and his idea of how politics work, politics is a game of survival, especially in dictatorships. And countries like Russia, countries like China, countries like Iran sometimes go way against what we would expect them to do because they're playing a long game of political survival, even when it doesn't fit the narrative that we've previously been fed. What does this mean for Iran long term? Well, the Iranians are isolated financially and economically. They've lost the military campaign for the greatest part. And now we're trying to see how long they can last. The United States cooperating with the Russians might be yet another nail in the coffin of the Iranian IRGC economy and yet another crack of hope for the Iranian people by yet another ally of their country or their government being moved more towards the side of the United States for various reasons than allowing and supporting for their dictatorial regime to continue controlling the narrative and the events here in the Middle East. All in all, less points for Iran, good story, more points for the rest of the world and our Western way of life. That is the bottom line. That's really where all the interests come in. And sometimes, just sometimes, we get to see the story behind the scenes, like in this case.
And Mati, when Trump says to Iran, I have no timeline, I'm not in a rush, is he essentially turning time from an Iranian weapon into an American weapon?
Several months ago, the United States was in a hurry to reach an agreement when it comes to Iran, and the Iranians were in a hurry to drag out time, to draw out time. Right now, the tables have turned. The US has publicly said more than a month ago, we're willing to wait. As far as we're concerned, let's freeze the situation against Iran. Let's put on max all the pressure pipelines that we have that have to do with military presence and financial pressure. And we'll wait. We'll wait till after the midterms. We'll wait till after the elections in Israel. And, we'll just get back to this story when that time comes. The Iranians thought several months ago that they had sort of the upper hand on the US because Trump was running out of time, was running out of political credit to carry out this war. They've been found to be wrong. The war continues, the pressure continues on Iran, and it's not taking a significant price from the Republican Party or from President Trump, at least from what we're seeing from polling and information at the moment. And that means that the decision made by the Trump White House and that of the Israeli government is the right decision. The decision that you can go against Iran, you can bleed them out financially and I guess also practically when it comes to the IRGC, and still wait and allow them to crack, allow them to break, knowing that the Israeli, the American economy and military systems have a much longer runway as far as resources, time, and, just grit, the ability to fight, than their Iranian counterparts. What the Iranians thought was an advantage on their court, they found is a disadvantage because they are weaker, they have less reserves of cash, and they're quickly losing whatever they had of a global alliance in fighting against the United States. And one last thing, there was this misconception running around for a while, I guess by media outlets that are opposed to the Trump government, that was claiming that Trump won't be able to fight after the midterm elections. And that's simply not true. From a factual perspective, from a legal perspective, from a political perspective, whether the Republicans come out with the upper hand or the lower hand in the coming midterm elections, President Trump, for the most part, with very little changes, can continue fighting the same conflict that he is in Iran. And that doesn't really change. Not only that, after the midterm elections, he'll be liberated to be able to maneuver politically in a far more aggressive way than he was now, because it's already been decided. The same applies to Israel, by the way. Israel has elections at the end of the month of October. And after that point, regardless of who the prime minister is, we have the ability politically to run full force against whatever Iranian agenda prevails at the time or exists at the time, with very little political consequences in Israel. And what Iran thought was political pressure that they could apply to Israel, to the United States, they're now finding that the exact opposite exists. And they are the ones, not Israel, who's running out of options.
And Mati, is the CIA director's visit to Moscow a specific warning to Putin or a sign that Washington now sees the Russia-Iran axis as the next central threat to the global order?
President Trump highlights this very, very big question mark that we have about what's happening in Iran on a leadership level. He challenges the conception or the concept that Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader, is actually functioning and healthy enough to make decisions. And for months, we've been stuck with this question in the back of our heads. Who is really calling the shots in Iran? The Iranian government is trying to create the perception that the supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is working behind the scenes together with the Prime Minister Pezeshkian, together with the clerics' councils, together with the IRGC to make the decisions. But it's possible, and Trump alludes to this, that that's not the case, that he is not well enough to actually do anything, let alone make decisions on policy and the state of the war. And that might be true. We have yet to see any evidence that the supreme leader of Iran is alive or well. No audio recordings, no edited videos, nothing, no image, nothing, not even a photoshopped image to indicate that the man is alive. And if he is alive, and we truly don't know, if he is alive, is he in possibly such a bad physical condition that even audio can't be released of his situation? To add to this question, to add to this, dilemma, we have these bizarre stories coming out in recent weeks about members of the government meeting with him and claiming that they weren't even sure it was him. This is Pezeshkian claims the story, and other stories about him being or severely hurt or actually not alive. One way or another, we don't know. This might be President Trump egging on the Iranians to try and force them to produce some kind of footage that indicates the situation of the supreme leader, but it might also be the truth that he is so weak, so beaten down, so unable to communicate that the U.S. knows and is leaking this to us around the world that he's not going back to being the supreme leader. And that leaves the question of who's actually making the decisions and can you negotiate with them? Let's just play guesswork for just a little second as we wrap this up. Let's assume that there is no supreme leader, that if he's alive, he's not in a situation or a condition to make any decisions or communicate with anyone. That means there is no chain of command in Iran in the way that we expect it to be. That means that someone in the IRGC and someone's possibly in the different cleric committees are the ones making the decisions without a consensus, without really having the power to dictate for everyone else what's going to happen. That might be the case. And if that is the case, that means that the US is on the right path, the path of exhausting the regime, not of trying to negotiate with it. Because if no one can really make a decision and there is no clear path forward with the regime, why negotiate with them knowing full well that they'll never be able to follow up and commit to the decisions they make? That is the true answer. And President Trump gives us a glimpse into the questions that exist within the Oval Office and within governments and intelligence organizations around the world of whether or not the supreme leader is alive and whether or not he's able to make any decisions, and therefore whether or not there's a government to work with in Iran proper. And assuming that isn't the case, well, then maximum pressure is the right path on Iran until they crack and the regime is replaced. That has been the goal from the beginning and remains the goal today.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani. That really helped me better understand what we are facing. And to all of you, keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click the subscribe button. Look us up on our social media accounts, Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani, to see life in Israel through our eyes. So, on September 1st, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian is expected to meet Vladimir Putin in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. That meeting comes only days after CIA Director John Ratcliffe's unusual visit to Moscow. The exact message that he carried is disputed publicly, but the timing is not. Washington is increasing pressure on Iran, and Tehran is preparing a face-to-face meeting with Putin. Bishkek also gives both leaders a multilateral setting to discuss security and economic cooperation without announcing a separate Russian-Iranian summit. So, the question is immediate. How much is Russia willing to risk to keep Iran supplied while Washington tries to make every outside lifeline more expensive? Tehran now claims that its military recovery is already complete. Army spokesman Mojtaba Khamenei, he says that every weapon systems damaged during this war has been rebuilt, and new systems have entered service, some produced inside Iran and some imported from abroad. That is an Iranian claim, not an independently verified battlefield assessment. Tehran has also not identified which countries supplied the imported systems. This is where the Russian connection becomes important. Replacing launchers is one challenge. Replacing radars, air defensive sensors, communications equipment, electronic warfare systems, and specialized components after repeated American and Israeli strikes is another. If foreign military technology is entering Iran, Washington will want to know who supplies it, how it moves, and whether that route can be cut. Any Russian company, bank, or transport network involved would also have to calculate the growing risk from the American sanctions campaign. Tehran is also protecting another damaged part of its strategic infrastructure. I'm talking about the nuclear program. Nuclear chief Mohammad Eslami, he says that Iran still considers itself in wartime conditions. Inspectors can continue visiting facilities that were not attacked, he says, but sites struck during the war will remain off limits until a special inspection protocol is agreed. Security problems at the bombed nuclear facility can be real, but keeping inspectors outside also makes it harder to determine what survived, what was moved, and what may be rebuilt. Now, look at who arrived in Tehran today. Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. He is meeting Iranian officials to discuss de-escalation and freedom of navigation through Hormuz. The White House says that there are no direct negotiations with Iran and that the naval blockade and economic campaign remains in force. In other words, Qatar is trying to create diplomatic space without carrying a formal American negotiation. Doha has an extremely expensive reason to try. Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports have fallen by 96% during the 6 months of this war, with only 18 LNG cargoes exported compared to 509 during the same period last year. The estimated loss in gas sales is about $24 billion, and 2 Qatari tankers have been attacked. Before the war, Qatar supplied roughly 1/5 of the world's daily LNG. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have pipelines and ports that provide at least partial alternatives to Hormuz. Qatar's LNG system is far more exposed because those giant gas carriers, they still have to leave the Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. And that makes Doha's mediation much easier to understand. Qatar is not simply trying to calm two angry governments. It is trying to reopen the route, carry the foundation of its economy. And even here, the diplomacy is less settled than Tehran's public statements suggest. The Revolutionary Guards, they announced an agreement with Oman over shipping lanes and future revenues. But senior Iranian officials, they say that the two countries are still working on the details. The temporary framework under discussion would create a commercial navigation corridor through Iranian and Omani waters, continue mine clearing work, and could keep military vessels outside that corridor. Washington wants freedom of navigation. Tehran wants a recognized role in deciding how the strait is managed, and that difference remains unresolved. The tanker hit overnight by an unidentified projectile is another reminder that diplomatic language has not yet produced maritime security. Oil prices have fallen for a third straight day, as traders, they place in the possibility of progress, but a cheaper barrel is not proof that the strait is safe or that a final agreement exists. If you want to help us reach more people around the world, I call on you to hit the subscribe button on TBN Israel YouTube channel right here. And leave me a comment, let me know why it's important to share the truth and fight terrorist organizations. So, What you see on YouTube is only part of the story. You can get closer, first-hand reports, stories of faith, resilience, and hope from behind the scenes by going to www.tbn.org/journeys/boots. Okay, you can also text the word from North America, boots, to 316-316 to receive direct updates from TBN Israel. With Mati, Shoshani, and myself, we are reporting from the ground what we see, know, and feel. We are IDF officers. We are Israelis. We live here, and we know what's happening. So, Iran is widening the confrontation in another direction: information. Its armed forces, they have declared several Persian language broadcasters operating outside Iran to be part of what they call a military target bank, accusing them of working with American and Israeli intelligence agencies. No location or timetable for an attack was announced, but still, Tehran is now publicly putting civilian information platforms inside a military targeting framework. Control over information at home, that's what they want. We want to make sure that they are in charge of what the Iranians see, hear, and know. The same effort to extend pressure beyond Iran's borders is visible in Yemen, when Houthi missile fire has struck the Mokha area and locations south of Qatar on the Red Sea coast, with large secondary explosions reported around ammunition storage sites. The exact ownership and origin of the weapons stored there have not been independently confirmed, but Mokha, it sits near the southern approach to the Bab el-Mandab Strait, another critical shipping route connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Eden. So while Tehran is contested in Hormuz, an Iranian-backed force is keeping pressure on another maritime corridor, hundreds of miles away. Saudi Arabia must decide whether repeated Houthi missile and drone attacks can be contained without reopening a much larger Yemen war. Israel is making a different calculation in Syria, this time with Turkey. The August 18 strike on Abu el-Dahour Air Base was timed before Turkish personnel and also planned systems there became operational. Israeli defense officials, they say that Turkish radar systems at that location could threaten Israeli freedom of action in Syrian airspace and complicate the future operations if the Iran front erupts again. Striking the base before Turkish crews were fully established also reduced that danger of turning an attack on infrastructure into a direct Israeli-Turkish clash. Israel now assesses that the specific Turkish effort to establish itself at that airfield was blocked. American envoy Tom Barak, he disputes how imminent that Turkish deployment really was, showing that even close allies are reading the Syrian battlefield differently. And further south, Israeli aircraft have again struck the Ali Taher ridge in southern Lebanon. Israel says that Hezbollah maintains a major underground complex beneath the area, and the ridge has repeatedly become a flashpoint between military action and also political negotiations. Lebanese leaders can discuss disarmament and a long-term arrangement, but surviving tunnels, drone positions, and weapon sites can pull those talks back towards combat. Gaza is now entering its own verification phase. Nikolai Mladenov told the United Nations Security Council that the roadmap, it requires the decommissioning of weapons that are held by Hamas and by other Palestinian armed factions. The process is supposed to be measured by verified performance on the ground, not simply by dates on a calendar. A weapon is not removed because somebody announces it. It must be surrendered, stored, dismantled, or otherwise rendered unusable under a system that can be checked. Saudi Arabia is also pushing back on Washington's diplomatic package. A source close to the royal court says that normalization with Israel remains off the table without a Palestinian state, even as Trump ties implementation of the 30-year U.S.-Saudi civilian nuclear framework to joining the Abraham Accords. Russia is being asked how far it will go for Tehran. Qatar is paying billions for a blocked maritime system, and Iran is trying to move it to prove that it can rebuild faster than Washington and Israel can isolate it. So if Moscow keeps the door open, inspectors remain outside the damaged nuclear sites, and Iran's regional allies, they keep expanding the battlefield, will the next phase be settled through negotiations, or by the next missile launched across this region? Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Very serious questions. In the meantime, keep spreading the truth. This is the first casualty of this war, the truth. Secondly, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for wisdom to our leaders. Pray for the soldiers. Pray for our enemies to be touched by God's love and for them to stop their attacks against us. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Thank you for being with us for another Boots on the Ground report.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.